He really, really hated Jerry Seinfeld. Now we know why. Tonight, show star Johnny Carson was the biggest boss of late-night TV for 30 years. He was known for being charming, funny, and really liking talented comedians. From Robin Williams to Joan Rivers, Carson helped tons of careers get started with just a nod and asking them to sit on his couch. But there was one comedian Carson never liked, even though he was super successful: Jerry Seinfeld. Back in the golden days of TV, Carson's thumbs up meant everything. If Johnny liked you, you could go from nobody to famous overnight. But behind the scenes of the entertainment world's most powerful show, Carson really didn't like the man who would become TV's highest-paid comedian. While millions of Americans watched Seinfeld in their living rooms every Thursday night, the man who built late-night TV couldn't stand him. Today, we're telling you about one of Hollywood's most interesting secret fights: the Cold War between TV's most powerful boss and the comedian who said he made a show about nothing. What could have made Carson dislike one of comedy's biggest stars so much? Was it personal, work stuff, or something even worse? The answer tells us a lot about both men and about how the entertainment world really works when the cameras aren't rolling. By the time you finish watching this video, you'll understand why the man who helped so many comedians' careers never gave Seinfeld his okay, and why that matters more than you might think. Stay with me, because the truth behind this Hollywood Cold War is more shocking than anything you've heard before. I'm Jerry Seinfeld, Jeannie Steinman. Hey Sam. Seinfeld's relationship with 17-year-old Shosanna Lonstein. It was 1993, and Jerry Seinfeld was at the very top of his fame. Seinfeld ruled Thursday nights. Critics said he was a comedy genius, and at 38 years old he had more power in Hollywood than most performers could ever dream of. That's when he met Shosanna Lonstein in Central Park, a student at the fancy Dalton School who was just 17 years old. What started as bumping into each other quickly became a relationship that made people across America feel uncomfortable. While Seinfeld said they were just friends until Shosanna turned 18, the two were often photographed together looking like a couple. Even with the 21-year age difference, she couldn't even legally drink while he was almost 40. Seinfeld seemed like he didn't notice that the public felt uncomfortable about this. For Johnny Carson, this was way too much. A TV insider who worked on The Tonight Show during its last years said Johnny was old-fashioned about certain things, and this crossed a line for him. He'd built his career on being the kind of entertainer that parents trusted, that represented a certain kind of class. To him, a middle-aged man dating a high schooler wasn't just wrong, it was trashy. Carson, then in his late 60s and near the end of his career, reportedly wouldn't even talk about Seinfeld's relationship on his show. When a joke about the couple didn't make the audience laugh, Carson quietly told his writers to remove any other mentions of Seinfeld's personal life. Johnny put up with a lot, remembered a former NBC boss who worked closely with Carson. But a 38-year-old dating a teenager wasn't one of them. He came from a time when there were certain unwritten rules about how celebrities should act. Dating someone young enough to be your daughter, especially someone still in high school, broke all of them. Even regular magazines couldn't ignore how weird the relationship was. People magazine ran a cover story called The Graduate, Appointed, reference to the 1967 movie about an older woman seducing a young man just out of college. Newsweek noted how gross the relationship was, questioning why someone at Seinfeld's level of success and maturity would go after someone so young. While Seinfeld and Lonstein eventually broke up after 4 years together, the damage to his reputation in certain circles was already done. And in Johnny Carson's world, a world that still valued being discreet, classy, and having certain moral standards, Seinfeld had shown himself as something less than a gentleman. Years later, when asked about Seinfeld during a rare after-retirement interview, Carson simply said, "Some comedians understand that with great success comes great responsibility. Others just understand success." The hidden meaning was impossible to miss. On TV and whatever the guy does, you think, "Oh, well, he's a cab driver. I'm sure he knows what he's doing." You don't think to yourself he's Seinfeld's arrogance and coldness off camera behind the familiar smirk and the "what's the deal with" catchphrase that made him famous. The real Jerry Seinfeld was reportedly a very different man than the one America welcomed into their living rooms each week. While his observational comedy connected with millions, those who worked with him described a person who was clinical, distant, and often dismissive of others. Carson, by contrast, was known for his real appreciation of the people who made his show possible. Despite his own massive fame, Johnny would learn stage workers' names, ask about their families, and show real interest in the people around him. For someone who had reached the top of television success, Carson kept a surprisingly down-to-earth perspective. Johnny never forgot that television was a team effort, said a longtime Tonight Show producer who later worked with Seinfeld. He understood that his success depended on hundreds of people doing their jobs well. Jerry, on the other hand, always gave the impression that he was doing everyone a favor just by showing up. When Seinfeld appeared on The Tonight Show, the difference between the two men's approaches became obvious to those backstage. While Seinfeld was always professional, always on time, always prepared. He rarely talked with staff members, seldom said thank you, and generally kept what one crew member called an invisible wall between himself and everyone else. Carson noticed. For a man who had hosted thousands of celebrities over his 30-year career, Seinfeld's behavior stood out, not for being clearly rude, but for lacking the warmth and humility that Carson valued. Johnny liked comedians who had layers, explained a former Tonight Show writer. He appreciated sharp wit, of course, but he also valued being real, being humble, and the ability to laugh at yourself. Jerry had the wit, but the rest, not so much. This became painfully obvious during a comedy roundtable discussion, where Seinfeld casually dismissed other comedians, including Carson favorites, like David Letterman and Jay Leno, for trying too hard to connect with audiences. While the audience laughed at Seinfeld's typical snark, those in the green room noticed Carson's tight smile. As one witness put it, the audience laughed, but the green room stayed silent. Everyone knew Johnny hated that kind of talk. Carson had built his empire on the idea that talent should speak for itself. Bragging about yourself and putting down other comedians were, in his view, signs of being insecure rather than confident. For a man who had survived in the cutthroat world of television for 3 decades without making enemies, Seinfeld's approach to his colleagues felt unnecessarily sharp-edged. Johnny once told me that the mark of a truly great comedian August, the 16th to the 18th, and in Vienna, Virginia on August the 25th. 25th. Would you welcome and quickly Jerry Seinfeld? Is that other comedians want to be around them, recalled comedian Gary Shandling years later with Jerry. That wasn't always the case. Carson valued modesty. Seinfeld flaunted wealth. Few topics showed the huge difference between Carson and Seinfeld, more clearly than their attitudes toward money and success. Despite making a fortune estimated at over $300 million during his broadcasting career, Johnny Carson lived pretty simply by Hollywood standards. His giving was quiet, his lifestyle understated, and his public image never revolved around his huge wealth. Johnny drove nice cars and had beautiful homes, remembered his longtime producer, Peter Lassily. But he never talked about them. He found that kind of thing distasteful. To him, showing off wealth was the quickest way to lose touch with your audience. Seinfeld, by contrast, built much of his post-sitcom identity around his extraordinary wealth. His collection of over 100 Porsches became legendary. His private jet travel became routine. His $100 million yearly income from Seinfeld reruns was discussed openly in interviews. Rather than downplaying his riches, Seinfeld seemed to enjoy them, building entire shows like Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee around his luxury car collection. This approach represented everything Carson disliked about modern celebrity culture. Having grown up during the Great Depression in Nebraska, Carson kept a Midwestern way of thinking about money throughout his life. Though he negotiated hard for his worth at NBC, becoming the highest-paid entertainer in television history, he thought public discussions of wealth were in poor taste. Johnny once told one of the writers on our staff, "You don't get funnier when your garage gets bigger," revealed a former Tonight Show staff member. He believed comedy came from struggle, from observation, from living a normal life. When he heard about Jerry's car collection and his constant talk about his wealth, he just shook his head. For Carson's generation of entertainers, there was something almost inappropriate about a comedian focusing so heavily on expensive things. The greats Carson admired, Jack Benny, George Burns, Bob Hope, all came from humble beginnings and kept a certain everyman quality despite their success. To Carson, that connection with ordinary life was the source of great comedy. Seinfeld's approach felt foreign to Carson, a symptom of a changing entertainment landscape where celebrities increasingly used their wealth as part of their brand. While younger audiences might have found Seinfeld's luxurious lifestyle inspiring, to Carson it represented a disconnect from the very people who had made that success possible. The audience can smell it when you lose touch with real life. Carson once remarked to his longtime sidekick Ed McMahon, "And when that happens, you stop being funny. You're just rich." For a man who valued comedy above all else, there could be no greater criticism. "Well, I'm here. We're all here. You're here." I think that's important because Seinfeld mocked Carson's talk show format. For 3 decades, Johnny Carson perfected the talk show format that would become the template for generations of hosts to follow. The monologue, the desk, the couch, the interviews. Carson turned these elements into an art form, creating a blueprint that Letterman, Leno, and countless others would adopt as their own. When Jerry Seinfeld launched his own interview series, Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee, in 2012, he made a point of positioning it as a rejection of Carson's format, a modern alternative to what he characterized as an outdated approach to celebrity conversations. "I don't want to interview actors about movies I haven't seen," Seinfeld said in multiple promotional interviews. "I'm not interested in that fake enthusiasm, that pretend interest. That's why Comedians in Cars is the only show worth doing. It's real." While Seinfeld never mentioned Carson by name, the implication was clear to industry insiders. The traditional talk show Carson's innovation and legacy was obsolete, fake, and unworthy of a real comedian's time. Johnny took that personally, revealed a close friend of Carson's who stayed in contact with him during his retirement years. Here was this guy who wouldn't have a career without the Tonight Show platform, basically dismissing Johnny's entire life's work as fake and phony. Of course it bothered him. Carson, famously sensitive to slights and deeply protective of his legacy, was reportedly hurt by Seinfeld's dismissive attitude toward the format he had spent his life perfecting. For Carson, the talk show was not just entertainment. It was a nightly conversation with America, a format that had seen the country through assassinations, wars, scandals, and triumphs. Johnny believed the talk show was America's town square, explained a former NBC executive. He took the responsibility seriously when Jerry suggested it was all just superficial nonsense that cut deep for Johnny, and for everyone who had devoted their lives to the format. What made the criticism particularly stinging was that Carson had provided Seinfeld with a crucial platform early in his career. Like so many comedians of his generation, Seinfeld's appearances on The Tonight Show had helped establish him with a national audience. To then turn around and dismiss that very format struck many of Carson's loyalists as ungrateful at best, disrespectful at worst. When asked about Seinfeld's comments during his retirement, Carson reportedly responded with characteristic, understated wit. "I guess Jerry doesn't realize that without talk shows, he'd still be performing in pizza parlors in Long Island." The comment, delivered with Carson's trademark twinkle, nonetheless revealed the genuine hurt behind the humor. You could take the plug and shove it in the hole, which I don't even feel comfortable saying for some reason, but that would eliminate the donut. The Hole and the Plug. Seinfeld's lack of emotional depth. Throughout his 3 decades on air, Johnny Carson showcased comedians who represented the full spectrum of the human experience. He championed Richard Pryor, whose raw confessional comedy tackled race, addiction, and personal demons. He embraced George Carlin, whose social commentary challenged audiences to question authority and convention. He adored Robin Williams, whose manic energy barely concealed the pain and vulnerability beneath. What these Carson favorites shared was a willingness to reveal themselves, their flaws, their struggles, their humanity in service of their comedy. For Carson, the best humor wasn't just about observation, it was about connection. Seinfeld represented the polar opposite approach. His comedy, by his own proud admission, avoided politics, emotion, pain, and personal revelation. "I'm not interested in feelings," he once declared in an interview. "I'm interested in funny." This deliberate superficiality stood in stark contrast to everything Carson valued in a comedian. While he could appreciate Seinfeld's technical precision and undeniable skill, Carson found his work lacking the depth that separated mere comics from true artists. Johnny believed comedy should make you laugh, but great comedy should make you feel something else, too. "Recognition, discomfort, relief," explained a longtime Carson confidant. He respected Jerry's craft, but he thought his comedy existed on the surface of life, never diving into the deeper waters where the real treasures are found. For Carson, who had weathered very public divorces, the death of his son, and his own battles with alcohol, comedy wasn't just about escaping life's difficulties. It was about transcending them, transforming them into something that could help others feel less alone. Seinfeld's approach, with its deliberate avoidance of emotional weight, struck Carson as a missed opportunity. "I'm not a comedian to teach you something or discuss cultural matters," Seinfeld once said. "It's not my job." To Carson, who believed that the greatest comedians did exactly that, this statement revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of comedy's potential power. When George Carlin died in 2008, Carson, then in the final months of his own life, reportedly remarked to a friend, "George never took the easy way. He made you think while you were laughing." That's the difference between being a success in comedy and making a genuine contribution. The comment wasn't directed at Seinfeld specifically, but those close to Carson understood the comparison he was drawing. In Carson's view, there were comedians who used their platform to illuminate the human condition. And then there was Jerry Seinfeld, a technically brilliant performer who, in Carson's estimation, had chosen the path of least resistance. "I bite a pit bull. That would be the most valuable thing I own." That was the Carson-Macdonald connection. A telling contrast. Long before his death in 2005, Johnny Carson had already identified a spiritual successor in the comedy world, Norm Macdonald. While Carson rarely commented on comedians after his retirement, he made an exception for Norm, reportedly telling close friends that Macdonald was the only comic who reminds me of myself. Perhaps the highest praise the king of late night could bestow. Johnny saw something special in Norm, revealed a longtime friend of Carson, who had remained close with him during his final years. He thought Norm was carrying on a tradition of comedy that went back to Jack Benny and beyond. Dry, deliberate, uncompromising. When Johnny watched Norm, he saw the continuation of a lineage that mattered to him deeply. This connection between Carson and Macdonald stands in stark contrast to Carson's feelings about Seinfeld. While Jerry represented polish and precision, Norm embodied the fearlessness and authenticity that Carson truly valued. Carson appreciated comedians who took risks, who weren't afraid to bomb if it meant staying true to their unique voice, a description that fit Macdonald perfectly, but seemed at odds with Seinfeld's carefully controlled approach. When Macdonald passed away in September 2021 after a private 9-year battle with cancer, tributes poured in from comedians across generations, from David Letterman to Conan O'Brien to Adam Sandler. One notable voice, however, remained conspicuously silent: Jerry Seinfeld. While no one expected Jerry to pretend to a friendship that didn't exist, the complete absence of recognition, not even a token tweet or statement, felt to many like a deliberate snub of a comedian whose approach to the craft represented everything. Seinfeld was not. If Johnny had still been alive, that silence would have spoken volumes to him, said a veteran comedian who had appeared on both The Tonight Show and Seinfeld. It would have confirmed everything he already believed about Jerry's character. What made the silence particularly striking was that Macdonald had appeared on Seinfeld's Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee in 2017. During their conversation, Norm had displayed his characteristic honesty and unique worldview, qualities that had endeared him to Carson years earlier. Yet, when Macdonald died, Seinfeld offered no public acknowledgement of their interaction or Norm's contribution to comedy. For those still loyal to Carson's memory and values, this omission reinforced their belief that Seinfeld lacked the generosity of spirit and respect for comedy's traditions that had made Carson such a beloved figure in the industry. While newer audiences might not have noticed or cared about Seinfeld's silence for comedy's old guard, it confirmed a narrative about Jerry that had been building for decades. Johnny always said you could judge a comedian's character by how they talk about other comedians, remembered Carson's former producer. By that measure, Jerry's silence said everything. The gulf between Johnny Carson and Jerry Seinfeld represents more than just a personality clash between two television titans. It embodies a fundamental shift in American entertainment. From Carson's era of broadcasting with its sense of shared cultural experience, to Seinfeld's narrow casting age of fragmented audiences and niche appeal, Carson came from a generation that believed fame carried responsibilities to your audience, to your craft, to the people who helped you succeed. His distaste for Seinfeld's approach wasn't just personal, it was philosophical. In Seinfeld, Carson saw the embodiment of a new kind of celebrity. Technically brilliant but emotionally detached, massively successful but spiritually isolated. What makes this unspoken feud so fascinating is that both men achieved extraordinary success despite their different approaches. Carson ruled late night for 30 years, becoming the most trusted man in America. Seinfeld created what many consider the greatest sitcom in television history, and amassed a fortune that would have been unimaginable in Carson's heyday. Yet for all his success, Seinfeld never received the one thing that might have mattered most in comedy circles: Johnny Carson's blessing. While countless lesser talents received that career-making invitation to the couch after their stand-up sets, Seinfeld remained, in Carson's eyes, an outsider to comedy's most sacred traditions. Technically flawless, but fundamentally missing something essential. Perhaps the final word on this unspoken rivalry belongs to Carson himself, who once told a friend during his retirement, "There are comedians who make you laugh until you cry. And then there are comedians who make you laugh until you think. The great ones do both. I'm still waiting for Jerry to make me think." As viewers, we're left to consider which approach has better stood the test of time: Carson's warm, inclusive style that invited all of America into a nightly conversation, or Seinfeld's cool, detached observations about life's trivialities. In an era of increasing division and isolation, Carson's vision of comedy as a unifying force feels increasingly like a relic of a different America, one that many of us find ourselves missing more with each passing year. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of Hollywood's most fascinating unspoken feuds, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more insights into the golden age of entertainment. Drop a comment below, sharing your thoughts on Carson Seinfeld and which comedian's approach resonates more with you. And let us know which Hollywood rivalries you'd like us to explore next. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time with more stories from when television truly was a shared national experience.